Thank you for being here. So one of the first things I want to say is that I am speaking to this based on my professional experience, training and experience in this work that I do. And I've worked with, I couldn't even tell you how many of the people that I've worked with have been suicidal in some aspect or another, thoughts or actually acted on it. I've never had anybody follow through and commit suicide, but lots of people who have had thoughts about it. So I'm mostly speaking from my professional experience of about 20-ish years in this capacity. I also had a lot of thoughts at different times in my life about suicide, about taking my life, about ending my life, about wanting to die, not wanting to wake up the next day, wishing that it would all just be over. Fortunately, it's been probably a couple of decades since I've been there. But that's what I'm speaking to today. I'm not speaking about suicide in the context of domestic violence, where somebody kills their partner or ex-partner and then kills themselves as suicide. I'm not talking about mass murder and then suicide. So I want that to be clear. There's certainly some similarities. There's some things that might be similar there, but I'm not referring at all in this video, in this conversation about that type of suicide. I'm talking about the more common suicide. And I wanted to talk about this. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I wanted to talk about this today in particular because, as most of you probably have heard, there have been two celebrities this week, I think even in less than Monday through Friday, who have taken their own lives. And much like the Me Too movement, people don't really start talking about it, at least in a big public way, or sharing it on their news feeds until somebody famous is afflicted, until somebody famous starts talking about it. So I thought that I would take this opportunity while everybody's talking about suicide and sharing things on their Facebook feed and Twitter feed about how sad this is, to talk about the reality of this. This isn't an anomaly. It's just that we don't typically hear about famous people who are taking their own lives, or it's one person at a time and it's talked about for a little while and then it dies down and we're not talking about it any longer. So, as I said, in my work, in the people that I tend to work with, thoughts about suicide are incredibly common. I couldn't tell you how many people I've worked with over the years. I can't tell you how many people have had some sort of thoughts around suicide, but I am pretty confident that when it comes to people that have really struggled for a long time, in whatever way they struggle, I think there's probably only been literally like a few people. And when I say literally, I actually mean literally. I think there's only been a few people who have really struggled at times in their life who haven't at least had a thought, a moment when they thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I just wish I wouldn't wake up tomorrow. I wish I could just go to sleep and it all be over. That those words might be different, but in some capacity, it is incredibly common. And we don't talk about it. We're afraid to say it. So much of what we see in media or movies and television, news, so much of what we see about people who are suicidal or who have thoughts about suicide, it's the like crazy depressed person over there, the person who can't get out of bed. It's the person who you're worried about committing mass murder. It's all these ideas about it being an extreme situation. And most times, except for what's going on within that person, there's nothing extreme about it. Oftentimes, there's no real outward sign that that's where that person is. And so it's not even so much, this is important, noticing signs, encouraging everyone to talk to people that they know who are struggling or depressed. Those are important things. But what's even more significant is that we, as individual human beings, we need to feel like it's okay to share our struggle. We have to know that we can share that we're struggling with something, maybe big, maybe small, but we have to know that we can struggle with something and share that without being seen as weak, without somebody thinking that, oh my God, you're going to end up like this person over there. You're going to end up in a mental institution. You're crazy. Because that's often, for the general population, that is the thought that they have, because nobody talks about the reality of this. Nobody talks about the fact that the mom in the pickup line at school earlier that day thought about it. Or that the coworker sitting next to you has thought about it. It's regular people, because we all struggle. No matter what your history is, we all struggle at times. And most of us are not going to go to considering suicide as the remedy. Many of us think that that's just the way our life is supposed to be. Some of us do something to try to feel better. I'm not suggesting those who commit suicide have not tried to do anything. Often they do. But how it looks on the outside is not what is portrayed. And so the idea that everybody is so surprised, oh my God, they had everything. Well, what does that really mean? That's a whole other conversation. But the reason that people are so surprised by this is in large part because we have this crazy idea that somebody who is suicidal looks a certain way. And no, they don't. They look just like me. Just like you. Whatever you might happen to look like, whether you're struggling or not. My perspective on this might be a little different than other people's. And not that I'm right and they're wrong, or vice versa. But I really believe, and this is in large part because of my work and because so many people who've experienced childhood abuse end up thinking about suicide as a way of coping with the incredibly painful feelings and life that is created as a result of that abuse. But suicide, or thoughts of suicide, or wanting to die, is because you've struggled so long and so often in silence. Maybe you've shared pieces here and there. Maybe people know that you struggled with an addiction or take meds for something or have this or that in your history. But we don't share what's really going on with us. We don't let people see the pain that we're in. And a large or a big reason for that is because we live in a culture, no matter what culture that is, most of us live in a culture that tells us that If you were stronger, then you wouldn't struggle. Even worse, that you've brought on that struggle, that you've created this in your life so that you can heal something from a past life. And those messages not only are completely inaccurate and hurtful, but they're not based in reality. They are not based in reality. I don't care what you're experiencing. If you're struggling, it's not because you've brought it on yourself. Now, if you've done something to hurt somebody and you feel guilty about that and you're struggling with that, yes, that may be your fault. But that's not the majority of what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are just struggling with life, maybe with a specific type of trauma or experience or mental health diagnosis. But it's all ultimately about the struggle of not feeling like you're enough, of believing that no matter what you do, you're always going to end up feeling exactly the same. And I know for many of you, no matter what your history is, you've done a lot to try to feel better. You've read the books, you've listened to the telesummits, you've maybe even gone to therapy or had 10 different coaches. You've done a lot of work, all the things that everybody says that you're supposed to do. Maybe even had inpatient treatment. And maybe some of those things even work for a little while. But you find that you're struggling again. It's not because you're incapable of healing. It's not because there isn't hope for you. It's not because you've brought it on yourself. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you haven't tried hard enough. It's because there's something under there that you're still needing to heal. And that's going to be different for everybody. I'm not suggesting that everybody has a deep traumatic childhood wound that they need to heal. Though if you look at statistics, many of you do. Whether you think that there's a connection or not. But even without having some deep childhood wounding, we all struggle with things. And when we struggle, we tend to pull back from people, which is the exact opposite of what we need. What we need in those moments is to feel connected. But when you've worn this mask, when you've lived this life that makes it seem like everything is fine, and you only talk about the good things, you're adding to that wound. You're adding to the idea that who you are is not enough. And eventually that catches up with us. It becomes too much. And we believe sometimes that the only alternative is to end our life. Because tomorrow is going to be exactly like today and the day before that. But I can tell you, and I believe this with everything in my being, that no matter what the struggle is, no matter how long you've struggled, there is the possibility, and I'm saying possibility because it's not an easy process and everybody's situation is different, but I do believe that probably at least for 99% of the people out there struggling with suicidal thoughts at times or not wanting to wake up the next morning, that you can feel differently. There is no quick fix. There isn't any one thing that you can do to get to that place. But I absolutely believe that you can. I truly believe that. And I believe that because of my own personal experience. I believe that because of all of the people that I've worked with over the years who has struggled with it and been able to get to a place where that's not where they go when they're struggling anymore. And it's not because they're stronger. It's not because they're better, they're more deserving, smarter. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's because they've given themselves the space and the support and the time, the patience that they need to heal, to be able to begin to believe in something better for themselves. Because when somebody finally takes that action, I truly believe that it's not really because they actually want to die, that they want death. I'm not saying that that's true for absolutely everybody, but I believe that it's true by far for the majority of people. It's not death that they're seeking. They're seeking a reprieve from the pain, from the struggle, from the hopelessness. And when you've been dealing with that for so long, it seems like the only solution, the only possible way to experience a reprieve from that is death. And it's not. It's not, and it's not easy to get to that place where you no longer go to ending your life as a way of coping. But I do believe that it's possible with the right support, with the patience that it takes to allow yourself to heal and to get the right help that you need. One of the things that a lot of people are talking about around suicide is how significant mental health issues are and how many people struggle with mental health issues. And I completely agree with that. And the stigma, absolutely agree with that. I'm all about ending the shame around struggle. But the truth is that many people who struggle with suicidal thoughts are not diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis. They're often misdiagnosed. And often, it's not just about a mental health diagnosis. It's not just about depression or anxiety or PTSD. It's not just about here. These are the symptoms. Okay, here's your diagnosis. Here's your medication. There you go. There's a reason that people are depressed. There's a reason that people are anxious. There's a reason that people have PTSD. There's a reason that people feel so lonely and isolated. And it's not because they were born with a chemical imbalance. Is it true that there are people that have some things that are off in their brain chemistry? Yes. But there's actually new research that's been coming out showing that it's not about that it isn't just about a chemical imbalance. There's a reason that we feel depressed. Because we believe something about ourselves or the world around us, and we repeat those ideas to ourselves over and over again. There's a reason that we feel anxious. And it could be any number of so many different things. One thing that I do know is that if you have experienced any sort of childhood struggle, dysfunction, abuse, and there's so many different ways that we experience wounding in childhood, but if you are aware that there's something in your childhood that has left a mark, maybe you don't think that it feels like it has for your life, but if you look at other people, you can say, yes, I could see how that could affect you. But you think that that may not apply to you. Unless you've done the really deep work of recognizing and honoring what that is and really doing the healing that it takes to heal that, it is affecting you in your current life. It may not be obvious. It may be with feeling anxious when you do certain kinds of things or you're around certain kinds of people. It may be continuing to have bad days when you've been around all kinds of people and should have felt happy, but you find feeling even more lonely. These are the kinds of things that we need to pay attention to. These are the kinds of things that, when left unseen, get bigger. And when we don't really understand why we're feeling the way that we are, it feels so much bigger because we don't understand why. And if we don't understand why, or that there is a reason, how can we possibly feel hopeful that there's a solution? There are so many ideas out there about law of attraction and spirituality, and those are good things, great things. They're really helping people see things a little bit differently, and there's a lot of benefit there. But I have been amazed in some of the conversations that I've had with people who are incredibly smart, who are professional and successful and beautiful people, but have difficulty talking about wounding, about struggle, about depression, about honoring our own experiences in reality. And when I started recognizing that, I thought, what is happening here? I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And then I started, in trying to understand, started seeing how people are being blamed for their circumstances that they have no control over whatsoever. People are being blamed for being abused. Well, you brought that into your life in some way. I remember reading, I was in a Facebook group, and I remember reading a post from a woman who was in a domestic violence situation. And it just, it may make me a little emotional. But she said, I don't know how many years this has been going on, but it had been years. And she had children, I think, that were maybe teenagers or even grown. Actually, I think they were grown at that point. And she said something along the lines of, I've been in this relationship and I've done everything that I know to do in terms of law of attraction stuff and manifesting and all of that. I've done everything that I know to do. So I must be experiencing this because I still have more to learn, that this is my karma and I have something to learn. And I almost, I had to read that a few different times because I thought, oh my God, what is going on here? And some of the responses were, yes, she was asking whether she should leave or not. And some of the responses were, you need to stay until you've learned what you need to learn in this lifetime. Or you need to stay so that you can find your strength in standing up to him or setting boundaries. Or it's just some of the well-meaning but so destructive comments. And I wasn't sure. I hesitated with posting my own thoughts about it because it was an environment that didn't want to hear what I had to say. So I didn't get into a whole lot, but I did let her know from my perspective, being somebody who works with a lot of domestic violence survivors, being one myself, that in no way was it her fault that she was in this situation, and that there was nothing left for her to learn other than she was worth more than that. But it was such a scary, clear example of the kinds of messages that even very, very well-meaning people are putting out there. And again, even as a mental health professional, even as a psychotherapist who has been doing this kind of work for nearly 20 years, there are a lot of other mental health professionals that may have a different opinion than I do, and that's okay. But I also know that in sharing my perspective, in helping people understand the root of the struggle, the core wounding that may be there, in helping them understand that they can heal, that I have been able to be with people in this journey who are going from actively trying to kill themselves to no longer wanting to die. And not only no longer wanting to die, but having a hard time ever believing that they did, feeling so grateful that they didn't give up, because they're living the life that they never could have imagined possible before. And those people are not better or stronger or more worthy than you. 2 celebrities died in this past week by choosing to take their own lives. But in this week that those 2 celebrities took their lives, more than 15,000 other people in the world also took theirs. There's all the condolences going out. It's so sad about him. It's so sad about her. My thoughts and prayers for their families. What about the over 15,000 other people this week? The over 15,000 people the week before? Or the over 15,000 people next week? They're your neighbors, your friends, your partners, your coworkers, your mentors. These are people in our realms. And we cannot save anybody. I think that's important to make clear. We cannot save somebody from suicide. What we can do is let people know by example, that we can talk about what's going on. That I want to be with you even if you're having a hard day. That I'm here for you. That I struggle too. That there are days that I don't want to leave the house. There are days that I don't feel like I can show up again. We We teach people, we let people know that because they see it in us. Because when we tell somebody, I'm here for you, if they're struggling, if they've been struggling for a while, and people who are suicidal have been struggling for a while, they might hear you and they might desperately, desperately want to believe you. But because of what they're believing about themselves, they may not be able to. So if on a regular basis, as a society, we can be honest and not just share the pictures of our beautiful vacations and 6-figure months, but if we can be real about the fact that today wasn't a great day, that this or that thing happened to me, that I know that everybody thinks my relationship is an example for a beautiful relationship, but inside, I don't want to be alone with that person. Then other people begin to recognize that they're not alone. And one of the things about suicide, or even desire for suicide, is that ultimately we feel that we're alone. Because no matter how bad the struggle is, if we actually can believe that we're not in it alone, then that sense of hope, even if it's just a sliver, that sense of hope exists. Suicide happens when you feel like there's absolutely no other choice. And when we can all begin to feel safe enough to show up, to go deep, to stop pretending, we will live in a very different world. The statistic I gave you about more than 15,000 people every week, that's from the World Health Organization. That's completed suicides. And there are so many more that are unsuccessful, fortunately. And even more when you consider the number of people who just don't want to wake up tomorrow. In America, every day, 123 people kill themselves. Complete a suicide. We live in a culture that, while so connected on social media, are so completely disconnected. So completely disconnected. We can never truly feel connected to another human being if we're not fully allowing ourselves to be seen. If we're not letting the people closest to us know our reality, know the things that we're desperately trying to keep people from knowing. And shame is so often a big piece of that. It's not a coincidence that shame is something that I've been talking about for the same amount of time that I've been talking with people who are suicidal. Those two things are very, very interconnected. We may not identify it as shame, but very often that is a piece of it. And it could be shame for feeling suicidal, but often there's shame that led you to that place in the first place. When I say you cannot heal what you deny is wounded, what I mean by that, and why I think that it matters so much, and will not stop saying it even though it sounds hopeless or whatever, is because we have to be willing, we have to be able to look at, why do I feel this way? Why do I continue to struggle when all of this is going on? When I started my career as a bachelor's level social worker, I worked in addiction, which is what I thought I wanted to do. I worked with adolescents, and that's what I really thought that I wanted to do. I worked in an inpatient program. I didn't work there very long because it didn't take long, and I recognized, what the hell is going on here? How do you expect, you've got them in this confined space for 30 days, and yet you're not talking about why they're an addict at 10 or 12 or 15 years old. There's a reason that people become an addict. There's a reason that people struggle, no matter how that looks. But in this inpatient addiction unit, they weren't talking about why they were an addict. And then they were sending them back out into the very place that created the circumstances for them to become an addict without ever talking about it. If that isn't insanity. But whether it's addiction or anything else, we cannot heal it until we're able to recognize what it actually is that's creating it. And when I say you cannot heal what you deny is wounded, well, once you are able to recognize and have an awareness of what is wounded, there's healing that happens in that very moment. Literally, just connecting that, just that moment of awareness, there's healing that happens because that wound is honored. That struggle, that pain that has been created is honored. And healing happens in that very moment. And the good news is, and this is why I don't find it depressing, the good news is we're all wounded anyway, whether we recognize it or not. But when you recognize what that wound is, then you can actually do something about it. People will often say to me, how do you do what you do? It must be so horrible to hear these stories all the time. It must be so depressing. And I've always just said, no, it's not. And I love what I do. And there were times that I found myself wondering, oh my God, is there something wrong with me? Why am I not depressed? How do I feel energized actually by the work that I'm doing? Oh my God, is there something like emotionally, psychologically wrong with me that I don't feel hopeless or depressed? And I realized when I asked myself that question, no, I don't feel bad or down or depressed. I don't think it's hard to listen to story after story because I know that anytime somebody is willing to share with me, what their wound is, and this is true for anybody, whether it's abuse or something completely different, when you are willing to share that and get the help and support that you need and that you deserve, there's so much hope. It's so energizing to me, and I feel so much hope for that person because they're finally acknowledging, they're shining light on what that wound is. And from that moment, they begin to heal. so that they don't continue to struggle, so that they don't end up in that place where the only option feels like death. Please, if you are finding yourself in these last weeks or in the next years struggling, having thoughts about suicide, having thoughts about not wanting to wake up, please talk to somebody. Yes, there are hotlines, and they actually can be helpful. I know that nobody feels like you want to reach out to a stranger in those moments, but they actually really can be helpful, because when we're in that place, that sense of isolation and feeling so totally and completely alone is so intense and overwhelming. So if we can reach out to somebody, and if we've been able to share that we're struggling in any way at all, then there is somebody there. There is hope. As long as you are breathing, there is hope. As long as you continue to put one foot in front of the other, there is hope. And that doesn't mean that every second of every day you have to put one foot in front of the other. It's okay to take breaks. Just please don't give up. There's so much waiting out there for you. If you honor yourself and whatever that struggle is, and get the support, the proper support. A friend can be there to support you, but they're not going to be able to help you really get at and heal what is underlying that. You can search in the US, you can search goodtherapy.org or Psychology Today for a therapist. If you're a survivor of sexual assault, put in Rape Crisis Center with your zip code or your province and find a rape crisis center. And if they can't help you, they can refer you to somebody who can. Please seek the proper support, somebody who is trained in these issues, somebody who is educated and credentialed for these kinds of issues. You are worthy and you deserve to live the life that you are meant to live. Whew. Wow. So I just kind of went on there. It was just kind of coming through. So hopefully it all makes sense. So hi. Oh, thank you. I made a couple of notes that I wanted to try to make sure that I shared. Just making sure that I covered everything. So if anybody has any questions, I am happy to try to answer to the best of my ability. I know that this is a heavy conversation. I know it's not easy to talk about, whether you yourself have struggled or you haven't and you're not sure what to do. Oh, and I wanted to say this too. If you know somebody who you know has struggled with self-esteem or feeling isolated or alone or addiction or abuse or just kind of struggles in general, I said this before, but I want to say it again. We cannot save somebody else. We can't. Even myself as a therapist in private practice working with suicidal people, I could not save anybody. So please don't take on that responsibility. Don't feel like it's up to you to make sure that somebody doesn't take their life, because we cannot do that. If somebody is absolutely set, and it takes a while for people to actually get to that point, but if they're in that place, we can let them know that we care and that we're there and what resources might be available. But if they make that choice, it's not because we didn't try hard enough. It's not because we did something wrong. It's not because we weren't enough. So please keep that in mind as well. What we can do, like I said a little while ago, I think one of the most important things we can do is to work at sharing ourselves more openly, being more real. And I know that it's not easy to do. We do not live in societies that encourage that at all. You know, sharing the message that I've shared, and I've worded it differently at different times, also is not easy. In different settings, not in a rude way necessarily, but I'm shut down quite often when I start talking about stuff, not suicide even, not even talking about suicide, but when I talk about struggle, when I talk about shame or worthiness, wounding. I did a podcast interview with somebody quite a while ago, and I remember I was talking about wounding because that's what I talk about, and it was a good conversation. I thought it was a good conversation, good interview, and I remember she said, "Oh my gosh, if my mentor or coach or somebody heard me or heard wound come out of my mouth, like she would have been like, oh my God." And I thought, okay, that's part of the problem here. So I myself have had a hard time at different points or with different groups talking about this kind of stuff, because I know that people aren't really open to it. I was working with somebody once who was kind of helping me with the message and my work, like business kind of stuff. And of course, I talk about, in my copy, I talk about struggle, I talk about wounding, I talk about healing. And subtly, it wasn't overt, but kind of subtly, I was steered away from using struggle, wound, even healing, because it's like low vibration, or that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear hope. They want to hear positive. And what I find so interesting is that when I talk about this stuff, I am always talking about hope. Like, in fact, if you watch most of my videos, I probably talk about hope. Like, you hear hope come out of my mouth probably more than you hear wound come out of my mouth. But when people hear those low vibration or heavy words, it's like something shuts down. If you start to feel something that doesn't feel good or isn't a high vibration feeling, you shut it down. This is the world that we're living in. Is it a coincidence that as those realms have increased in popularity, that the numbers of completed suicides is going up? Maybe. It could be. I don't know that I necessarily believe in coincidence most of the time, though. So remembering that we can be there to support somebody, and we can say, hey, if you ever want to talk, whatever you want to talk about, I may not have the answer, but I'm here to listen. Maybe encouraging people to seek professional help. But the more that we can be an example of being real or authentic, the more that we can show up without this facade, the more other people will begin to show up that way too. And I know that many of you see yourselves as teachers, as leaders, and as teachers and leaders, and I see this for myself too as a therapist, I believe that we have an obligation, maybe even a moral obligation, to be real. Because the truth is that a leader who is not real, who is not authentic, I'm thinking about North Korea. People would say that he is a leader, but is he really? I don't know. I don't think so. If we're leaders in helping other people overcome, how can we help them overcome if we're not willing to show up ourselves? If we're not willing to have those conversations? I'm not saying that I'm absolutely right. I think it's a good conversation to have. And having worked in the field for as long as I have, and again, having my own experience and working with so many people that have been suicidal, I feel like my perspective is based in science, because actually there is some science behind psychology and things related to that, based in training and education and based in experience. And in a sense, I'm almost a little coming out of the closet in a way, because I talk a lot to those of you who are seeking me out, who are seeking things related to abuse or healing or shame. I very willingly and openly and happily connect with all of you and share this kind of stuff. But I have held back in talking about this kind of stuff in this way with the rest of the people that I know, whether I know them well or just Facebook friends. I haven't talked about it a lot with them, and this is the beginning of that. So I am taking my own advice, and whether anybody wants to hear it or not, I'm going to be talking about not necessarily suicide specifically, but talking about this reality. So I'm going to just go through quickly and see if there's thoughts or questions that I might be able to answer. Thank you all for being here and listening and being willing to share this time with me. Yes, when you don't believe that and not believing that you're worthy is part of what creates or lends itself, I guess, to somebody getting to that place where they feel suicidal, and why it is so difficult to take those steps. And what I want to, there's so much that I can say about worthiness, but what I think is what I want to say, what I'm feeling like I want to say right now about that is that just because you believe that you're unworthy does not make it so. It absolutely does not make it so. But we believe that we're unworthy because of all of the things that we continue to say to ourselves over and over again, because of the experiences that we've maybe had in our lives that would kind of show us that make it very easy to believe that we're unworthy. But that does not make it true. Somebody doing something to us, somebody hurting us, experiencing really difficult things in our lives does not make us unworthy of experiencing good. But as children, we have to understand it to the best of our ability. And the way that we do that is make it about us. And if we're being hurt, or if we experience something bad because of who we believe that we are, of course, we're going to be left with the idea that we're unworthy, because we believe that there's something about us that caused that to happen. So no matter what the reason is that you believe that you're unworthy, it is a belief that is based in lies. And it's difficult to change that belief, because it's literally having to go through a process of deprogramming, as if you had been in a cult and brainwashed, because in a sense you were. So it's quite literally about a process of deprogramming and then reprogramming. And that's why healing takes the time that it takes, no matter what belief we're trying to change. And there's a lot of people out there who are saying that they've got this technique or this program that will change your limiting beliefs or heal your trauma. And I absolutely believe this. And I have no doubt about this. And I believe this very strongly. And maybe I'm wrong, but I absolutely believe this. There is no one technique. There is no program out there that by itself can heal any core wounding, but especially not childhood trauma. There's different things that help, that are part of the healing process, that are tools for healing. And this is part of what makes things difficult, because people do these different things. People go to addiction treatment. There's a reason that the recidivism rate in inpatient addiction units are as high as they are, because they're not dealing with the core issue. But doing the healing, the healing of the core wounding, is something that takes time. We need practice. We need understanding and learning, and we need to be able to feel it in our body, in our bones, in our soul, that what we're learning and beginning to think could actually be true. And then it's a process of having that reinforced intentionally and deliberately with support, that we begin to believe it. But we need a lot of different experiences over time that helps us really believe and trust and feel safe in that. I'm just reading some of the comments, questions. Yes, thank you so much for sharing that, Jenny. I'm just using first names and not using a lot of names here, because I'm actually planning to share this video. Hopefully. I didn't even think about this. I wanted to share it on YouTube. Hopefully I can do that. Yes, and when you're in that place and you're struggling so much, it really does feel impossible. You literally are not able to see beyond what you've been struggling with for so long. It literally doesn't seem possible that anything will ever be different. And that's why, if more of us could talk about this, and not just therapists, I think therapists talking about it is important, but if regular people talked about struggle in general, then more and more people would understand that. And for so many people that I work with, thoughts about death, not wanting to wake up the next day, wishing you would die, wishing something would happen, taking your own life, so many actually have those thoughts as children, as young children, because it feels like it's the only possible way out. I know my first thoughts were, I'm not really even sure, but I was definitely a child. I think even before I was a teenager. And then continued at different times up until, I don't know, probably my mid-ish 20s. But it does get better. It can get better. We just have to give ourselves the time and the practice with the right support to get there. Yeah. So this kind of the idea of them getting out of that mindset. It is hard. And the only way that we can do it is doing it even if we're not sure that it's going to help. If we were able to get to a place where we thought, oh, okay, yeah, I think that's going to help. Okay, I'll give myself the time and space to work on that. Yeah, that's okay. Well, you've already kind of moved past that. What we need to do is start talking about it more openly, so that no matter where you're at, how long you've been struggling with it, or whether you're on the other side of it or whatever, is that more and more people recognize that just because your way of thinking is this way, that it can change, that it can be different. And it is hard. Absolutely. I don't know that I've ever worked with anybody who, when they came to me, were feeling like they were actually in a better place. People who seek help, they seek it because they recognize that they don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to feel that way anymore. They're at a kind of like the rock bottom idea. That's when people seek help, even if they don't believe it's going to be helpful. But there's a part of you, if you're continuing to breathe, if you're searching for help in some way or another, even through self-help books or whatever, if you're reaching out to somebody for help, there is a big part of you that continues to hold hope for something different. Even if you don't feel like it's hope, even if you can't connect to thoughts of hope, if every day you're putting one foot in front of the other, even if you need a rest on occasion, there is a big part of you that is holding on to hope and trusting that, and trusting in the knowing that there's a part of you that wants more. And maybe even a part of you that believes that it's possible to have more. This is such a good point. Linda, thank you for bringing this up. This was actually something that I did want to kind of bring up briefly. So even talking about the subject in counseling is hard because I don't want her to jump to the wrong conclusion. When I was first doing this, well, it's been throughout my work really. I don't work with people who are currently suicidal any longer since I'm not doing actual therapy. But one of the things that I would always talk about with people in the very beginning, like on our first session, is letting them know that if they expressed a desire to kill themselves and would not agree to keep themselves safe, that I would have to call somebody. And of course, that's not going to make people want to talk to you about it. But I had an obligation, a legal and ethical obligation to share that, because people needed to know that I would have to make a phone call. So it affected confidentiality and all of that. So I would have to let people know that. And I also recognize that when you tell somebody that, well, of course, they're not going to tell you. They don't want to end up in a hospital. They don't want other people to know. They don't want people to think that they're crazy. So I would always say to them, if you do not agree to keep yourself safe, because that's an important thing, because if they agreed to keep themselves safe, and I would have them sign a contract with me, then, and that they would reach out to me or reach out to somebody before acting on it, then that made a difference. And the other really, really, really important thing that I would say to them is that there is a difference. There's a big difference in having thoughts about not wanting to wake up or wishing that you would die or how you might take your own life. That there was a difference between having those thoughts and actually planning your death. And that it was incredibly important that we talk about the former, that we talk about those fears, those desires, that hopelessness, that they needed to bring that to me, and that in bringing that to me, we could do something about it instead of them getting to that place where I have to potentially call somebody. And like I said, I couldn't even tell you how many people I've worked with who have had thoughts about suicide on some level or another. And I think that there was only one time ever in all the people that I've ever worked with, I think that there was only one time that I ended up having to call the crisis management services for a client. And she knew that I was going to have to do it. And she was okay with that. And she needed, I think, to be free from some of the life stressors that she had to deal with. But maybe have that conversation with your counselor. Maybe say, under what circumstances would you actually have to call somebody? Maybe share with her, seeing that there's so many conversations happening with suicide, and what are her thoughts about it, or something like that. But please, please, please talk to your counselor about it. It is so important, and you deserve to be free from these thoughts, these feelings, this pain. Please talk to somebody. Struggle with thoughts of suicide. Have not made any plans. Good. I'm relieved and very happy to hear that. Fantasize about how it would be to be free of the pain. Yeah. And that's really it. And when we can recognize, I talk about suicide as a coping mechanism quite a bit in my work. I don't necessarily talk about it a lot, like in a video setting. But I don't want to get into this too much because there's some nuances and stuff that I would need to share if I'm going to talk about it in a bigger way. But for most people, thoughts of suicide, the desire for suicide, really is a coping mechanism. It's the thing that we can go to that we know without any doubt whatsoever is going to end that pain. And so we do fantasize about it. We do think about what it would be like or how we would do it, what would be the best way or whatever. But again, it's not necessarily because we want death. It's because we want freedom. And we feel that that's the only way, we think that that's the only way we will ever experience freedom. And it's not. And the more that we can talk about this, the more people will begin to understand that it's not actual freedom. It's just that you cease to exist. And so there's nothing. But when you give yourself the time and the space and the proper support, it is possible to feel that freedom that you so desperately are seeking. Making it clear again, it's not easy. There is no quick fix. So hard to share my struggles. I can feel for everyone else but myself. I think that there's so many people who can feel or who feel so similarly. And part of the reason I think that it is so easy to be there for other people in that sense is because we empathize so greatly, because we know exactly what it feels like. And I don't know exactly for sure, but I am fairly confident that there is somebody in your life who would desperately want to be there for you if given the opportunity. Even just on a bad day, it doesn't have to be where you're feeling suicidal, just struggling with something. Been struggling with thoughts of suicide for a while. I have a past attempt. I've been working hard with a therapist that I have and peeled away the onion layers, yes, from childhood, which led to the adult traumas. Unfortunately, I have no hope in overcoming my traumas at this time. Please, please, please. I know what it feels like to feel hopeless. I do. I have been there myself. And if it wasn't in my early 20s, if it wasn't, or I guess even late teens, early 20s, if I had not had children, I'm not sure what might have happened. But for me, what I came to quite often was I felt like it would be unfair to my children. That's what I thought. I felt like it would be unfair to my children to add that to their life. There was a part of me that actually believed that they would be better off if I had killed myself, if I was no longer around. I believe that. I absolutely believe that for lots of reasons, probably. But whatever the trauma is, whatever the pain is, I really strongly, very much believe, I truly believe with everything in my being that you can get to a place where you no longer feel this. And I realize that you may not know me that well, but I really do not say things. I do not share this kind of stuff with people because I think it's what they need to hear, or I believe it's the right thing to say. I say these things because I believe them, and I believe them because of my own journey and because of what I've witnessed as I've journeyed with others on their healing, what I've witnessed in that process. Whatever the pain is, whatever the betrayal or the trauma is, and please know I'm not trying to minimize whatever that may be. Whatever that is, there is hope. There is hope. It's not easy, but you've already been living with such pain and such struggle. You've lived this long with all of this. Please, please don't give up. Please don't give up. You owe it to yourself to have these conversations, to give yourself the time and the space that you've been working for, that you've been working toward, to see what can happen when you give yourself more time to heal. Please, please don't give up. I'm guessing if you've been talking to a therapist about this, then you have like resources that you reach out to, or that you can reach out to her when you're in crisis or whatever. Hopefully you've got some things that you've talked about with her or him or whomever. So please, please, please don't give up. Please don't give up. There is so much waiting for you, and you deserve to feel what comes on the other side. Any suggestions to help? Do you mean yourself? or help somebody else. If you want to, let me know what you mean there, because it's probably pretty different depending on what that is. So if you have any, or if you want to share what you mean, or who you're referring to there, any suggestions to help, I'd be happy to explore that a little bit. Just going back to see if there's any other comments or questions here that I can answer. So I've been on here for quite some time. I know I can get on here and plan to be here for 30 minutes or even an hour, and I always end up going over. But this is such a complex conversation, obviously. And everybody's experience is different, and everybody's wounding is different, and struggle is different, and I remember that feeling of hopelessness. I remember literally not even being able in my wildest imagination to come up with the possibility that I would feel the way that I do now. Truly, I didn't even have it available to me to imagine that I could feel the way that I do now. And if somebody had told me, like I'm kind of telling you guys, if somebody had told me at that point that one day, if I just gave it enough time, that I would feel the way that I do now, I wouldn't have been able to believe them. I really don't think that I would have. I would have thought that they really didn't understand. I would have thought that they didn't know what they were talking about, that they didn't know how undeserving I really was, and that if they did, they wouldn't believe that. I was there, and I very much believe those things. And that's part of the reason that I talk about this stuff, why I believe so passionately in what I'm saying here today. Because of my own experience, because of all of the mostly women that I have worked with over the years that have attempted, that have thought of suicide as the only possible option to ever not only just feel free of the pain, but to even feel better. So any suggestions to help then, since you were referring to your own kinds of thoughts but no plans, talk about it. Talk about it. If you're not in therapy, please seek out a therapist. Talk about how you're feeling. Talk about the hopelessness. Talk about why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. You don't have to believe that you'll feel differently. You don't have to have the answer as to why you're feeling the way that you are. Just please do not try to do this on your own. Even when it feels like it's not helping, please do not isolate. Please continue to talk about the ways that you're struggling. Even if you feel like a broken record, even if you're telling yourself, oh my God, people are going to hate me because I keep saying the same things over and over again, the people who care about you are not going to hate you. The people who care about you are going to feel grateful that you've chosen to share with them. They will. Are there going to be people who don't want to hear it? Yes, because they don't know what to do with it. because it makes them uncomfortable. But that has nothing to do with you or your worthiness, or even their desire to help you. It's because they don't know what to do. So keep searching, keep asking, keep reaching out. There are a lot of groups on Facebook for people that struggle with different kinds of things. Know that you're not alone. Please, please, please do not isolate. That is the absolute worst thing that you can do, because it reinforces all of that hopelessness, all of those ideas that nobody understands, and maybe even that nobody cares. Yeah, that sense of feeling invisible and all of that, like, and that feeling alone and invisible and that you don't matter, all of that is like this, I'm thinking of like a whirlpool that kind of pulls you down. It just one leads into the next, one thought, one idea leads into the next, and it's this horrible cycle of just pulling you deeper and deeper. But reminding yourself that all of those thoughts that you're having are thoughts. And yes, those thoughts create the feelings, the hopelessness, but those thoughts are based on those core beliefs, the fears of things never getting better, of maybe even believing that you don't deserve for them to get better. But they can, because when you do the work of getting at what it is that led to those thoughts in the first place, that led you to that place of feeling so hopeless, then you can do the work of healing. And again, it's not easy. It's not simple. I so desperately wish that there was a way or a 5-step formula to go through to heal. But there's not. But it does, and it can happen. And there are people you can talk to. If you're a survivor of abuse, my group on Facebook, Courageous Warriors, there are people in there that support. And yes, I have had to kind of moderate, because I don't want everybody in the group feeling responsible to save the life of somebody else. But when you're struggling and you're sharing, like, I'm having a really hard day and I've started feeling like I don't want to be here anymore, those things are important to be able to share. And it's okay to share those things. There's a lot of other groups I know on Facebook as well. There's sometimes local groups and communities for people who have suicidal thoughts or desires. There are options out there. I know that when you're in that place, the last thing that you want to do is search. But please, please don't give up. You deserve to have the life that's waiting for you on the other side. Thank you, Jesse, for saying that. Right now, I'm in an okay place, but sometimes when struggles are so tough, logic goes out the window. Yes. Isolation sets in, and being alone is all I feel. Reaching out is like the last thing I want to do, as I feel so unworthy. When I have felt like this in the past, it's more a feeling of ending all emotions and feelings. How would you say to reach out when you struggle so much with that anyway? So thank you for sharing everything that you just shared. And I think that you said it in a way that is kind of very kind of easy to understand, exactly kind of that process of what happens. Yeah, when you're in that place, you're acting from a place of emotion and pain and desperation. And so it is hard to remind yourself of all those tools and techniques. It's hard to remind yourself of when you maybe did go to somebody one point and they were there for you. Instead, what you go to is all the fears that you have that they're not going to want to be there this time. And I know that this feels impossible and may even seem dismissive, and clearly I'm not trying to be dismissive here. But what you do in that circumstance is do it anyway. And I know how ridiculous that might sound when you're really struggling, but you do it anyway. And in so many ways, in so many instances, you've already done that. Anybody who's ever struggled with suicidal thoughts, you've already done it anyway. You've already put one foot in front of the other anyway. You've already didn't act on it anyway. You've already reached out in some capacity anyway. So when you're feeling all of that and you're feeling so completely alone, you reach out anyway. And if you feel like I don't have anybody to reach out to, that's when like a crisis line can be helpful. And I know that's the last thing that you want to do. But if you feel like there's nobody actually in your life that you can reach out to, which is probably not actually the truth, but if that's how you're feeling in that moment, then reaching out to them can at least give you a few moments when that like intense, powerful feeling of wanting to give up, it can kind of halt that, even if it's just for a few moments. And from that place, maybe then you can reach out to somebody else. I so wish that there was something that I could say that, oh, well, this is what you do in those moments of complete desperation that will be better. This is what you can do that feels a little easier. I'm not aware of anything that fits into that category. But you really have, if at any point in your life you've had more than, well, if it's happened before this moment that you've had any thought ever of ending your life, you have done what you might have thought was impossible. You continued to breathe. You reached out. You distracted yourself. You did it anyway, whatever it may be. You got up and went to work. Maybe you did reach out to somebody. Even if you still felt bad later on in the day, in that moment, you did something. In that moment, or those moments, you stopped that momentum of the suicidal thought or feeling. And when we have enough of those, we have reprieve. And when we have those moments of reprieve, even if it's just a small little sliver of that hope, we see that it's okay to reach out. We get to experience the truth that somebody cares. So, even if you don't think it's going to be helpful, even if the last thing that you want to do is reach out, you do it anyway. You do it anyway. My family have always said that people who end their lives are cowards. This has only stopped me at times, as I didn't want to add to the list of failings. I'm a little hesitant to say that they're not cowards. Suicide isn't really at all about being a coward. And I could actually have a whole talk on that idea. Ending your life, I don't believe that people who end their lives are cowards. I do believe that people who end their lives have given up. that is incredibly sad. It's not easy. It's not an easy way out. Like a lot of people say it's an easy way out. I wouldn't say that it's an easy way out. It's absolutely not an easy way out. But people do it because it is a way out. And I truly do believe, I've said this several times already in this call or in this video, that if we give ourselves the time and the space and the support, we do get through it. If you've had a week when you have felt really suicidal, and then you have a day when it wasn't so bad, or you've had a week that it wasn't so bad, eventually that day turns into a week. That week turns into a month. That month turns into a few. It doesn't mean that you might not still go back to that place of thinking about death. You might, especially if things get really bad. But the more opportunity you give yourself to be in a space where you're able to feel any inkling of hope whatsoever, you open the door to even more of that. And you are worthy and deserving of a life filled with joy and love and connection. I know you may not be able to see that or feel that or believe it. It doesn't make it any less true. Whoever is here, whoever ends up listening to this at some point, that is true for you. It doesn't matter where you're at in your life, what you've been through, what you think you've done that makes you undeserving. That is still true for you. Yes, you are not invisible to us. I think for me, if I felt like this, like I want an end, friends would not expect it, so I feel I can't address it or talk about it. I think this is a really common thing, and I don't know if you've been here for the whole call or not, but I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier on. And I think that if all of us, no matter what your history is, no matter what your struggle is, if all of us can talk openly, authentically about the reality of our experiences and how we feel and our struggles, we'd understand, we would learn that we're not alone in that. And sometimes the people that we least expected, my understanding is I don't really know that much about either of the people, the celebrities who killed themselves this past week. And I think for the woman, people that knew her knew that she had struggled with anxiety and depression. With the other person, I don't know if that's true or not, but people are surprised. Like, oh my God, they seem like they have it all together. Or you'd never think that person was struggling in that way. Or, oh my God, look at their life. They've got everything going for them. And that's often why we tend to feel very alone, because we look at other people and think, well, nobody could possibly understand how bad I feel, because look at them, look at their lives, look what they've got, look what they've overcome or whatever. But the reality is that people that we often least expect it struggle in this way, but they are so good at wearing that mask that nobody knows. And I talked about this with the power of hearing me too. That's true for anything, any struggle. When we are willing to be open, it helps other people see that they can be open too. And our willingness to be open with our own struggle can sometimes literally save somebody else's life. I got an email from somebody one time. I've gotten actually emails from quite a few people over the years after watching some of my YouTube videos who have said that they felt hopeless and even had thought about suicide at different times or whatever, and they finally have hope and are working on their own healing. But I got a message from somebody one time who literally was planning to kill themselves later that day, who happened somehow to find a video of mine, and I don't remember what video, I don't know if they even shared which video, but watched a video where apparently I shared something and they recognized that they were not alone. That because I shared something about my experience personally and or professionally and what I've witnessed in other people, that they realized that they were no longer alone, that they were not, that it didn't have to be hopeless, that there was possibility for something different. And they didn't take their lives. And it wasn't me that saved them. I want to go back to that. I didn't save them. But hearing from somebody that somebody else felt similarly or struggled in the same way, it helps others recognize that they're not alone. And so whether we're willing to hear somebody else or we're willing to be courageous enough to share that, if all of us, any of us, are able to be vulnerable and much more real in our lives, we'd all feel very differently. And I know that it's not easy, and there is so much stigma and shame and like I said, I sometimes get like, oh, people don't want to talk about it. People do not want to talk about this kind of stuff, but there are a lot of people who do, especially if they can say, me too. And you never know if that person is going to be one of those people, whatever that struggle that you're sharing may be. There are groups on Facebook having to do with suicide. My emotion mind makes me think that everyone would be better off without me. Yes. And I think that that's, I'm just kind of reflecting a little bit. I think that anybody that I've ever known who has had suicidal thoughts has thought that, has believed that people would be better off if they were not around. And part of the reason that we believe that is because it reinforces that idea and it gives us something to reaffirm that that's reasonable, that that's a reasonable way out, that it's not just for us, that it's actually for other people too. I had a client one time who had been suicidal at different times, and she ended up sharing with me in our work together that she had children, and that she had actually had the thought of taking her children with her. And we've heard stories about that. And in her mind, so I had thoughts about suicide when I had children, but I never thought about taking them with me. I thought they would have been better off without me, but I never thought about taking them with me. But she actually believed, because of all of the dysfunction around her, and I don't know if she knew that her children had been abused at that point or not, or child had been abused at that point or not, but she actually believed in her mind that not only would, if she killed herself, would her children and everybody else be better off, but she actually had thoughts that her children would be better off if they also were no longer living. Because she was so desperate and so afraid of her children having to go through something similar, that's where her mind went. So no matter what the circumstances, it becomes about that being the only option. We believe that that's the only option to what we're struggling with, to the pain or to the fear of what might happen. And it is never the only option. Never is it the only option. And it's really not even ever the best option. Emotional mind tries to tell me that my family and therapist wouldn't care because they will move on just like I moved on from someone I lost. Well, the reality is that for those of us left behind, for whatever reason somebody dies, we do move on. That's the cycle of life. We find a way to move on because we survive. I mean, think about the things that you've already survived. You've probably survived a lot more difficult, traumatic, isolating kinds of things than the loss of somebody that you cared about. But you survived it because that's what we do. So yes, we go on when somebody that we love or care about dies. But just because we go on, it doesn't mean that we didn't care. It doesn't mean that we don't struggle for years with the pain of that loss. And just because somebody might struggle and we don't know how to help them, or because they're just not a lot of fun to be around, it doesn't mean that we would prefer that they not be alive any longer. If you give somebody the option, they're certainly not going to say, yeah, I think my life would be easier or more meaningful if you were not in it. Now, I say that, of course, there are some incredibly cruel people in the world, obviously very unhealthy people in the world who might actually say that, but clearly they're not normal, healthy people. Reasonable people, people who probably matter to you and who you matter to, they would never choose the option of you not being there. Never. And it wouldn't be easier. It would be different, of course, but it certainly wouldn't be easier. And the reality is that the people left behind, especially people close to you, one of the hardest things of getting over and grieving in the grieving process when somebody that you care about kills themselves, one of the most difficult things is the guilt of not doing enough or not knowing. And that is something that is incredibly difficult for those people to ever actually be able to get over. And I'm not saying that as a guilt trip. I'm saying that to let you know that if people truly didn't matter to somebody, because anybody who kills themselves thinks that they don't really matter. If you truly didn't matter, if somebody truly didn't matter, then those left behind wouldn't feel guilty. They wouldn't struggle with guilt sometimes for the rest of their lives. They feel guilty because you do matter. Because they're left thinking that, could I have done more? Maybe I should have made that phone call. Because you do matter. And the reality is we're not always very good at letting people know that they matter to us. Some of us are. Some of us do it so much that we don't take care of ourselves very well. But we're often not very good at that, because it can be a hard conversation sometimes to have, or we don't want to upset people or whatever. But you do matter. I have no doubt about that. Whew. This has been a long conversation, and I don't know if anybody will take the time to watch this on replay or not, but if you have, or if you've been here the entire time, thank you for not only spending this time with me, but thank you for being willing to sit here with me. Thank you for being willing to make space in your day, in your consciousness, to talk, to think about this reality that over 15,000 people every single week deal with. That's over 2,000 a day. And you, whether you're live now, you were live earlier, or you're watching this 2 years from now, you were courageous enough, strong enough, brave enough, caring enough to watch, to listen, to participate. It is a lie our brains believe in the moment, but I lost my mom and I have never stopped hurting because of it. People move on, but the pain doesn't stop. Yeah, I've had some fairly significant loss in my life. And while I've been able to go through the grieving process, and it certainly doesn't hurt in the way that it did then, but part of the reason that it hurts so much is because we are tied up with all kinds of guilt and fear and all kinds of other things. But I would give almost anything to have those people back in my life. And I am pretty sure that my mom did not kill herself. But she actually did, and I didn't even think about this earlier in the call. When I was, I think, 13 or 15 years old, my mom planned to kill herself. But she didn't die from suicide. But I certainly, while I have grieved her loss, and I don't think about her loss every single day of my life, I still miss her. I would give almost anything to have her back. So, and my mom and I did not have a great relationship. My mom is a big part of my childhood wounding. She did not actually abuse me, but she's a big part of the wounding that I experienced overall. So yes, you matter. We all matter to someone, whether we believe it or not. And most of us matter to multiple people on some level or another. It's really been great to have this conversation, and I am really honored to be able to hold space for these kinds of conversations, and I do believe that they are important. Wanted to when I was younger. I remember telling someone at church that if I went back home that night, I would. I can remember seeing it play out in my head, and I didn't go home that night. I'm glad. I am so glad that you did not go home for whatever reason. For whatever reason, I'm so glad that you didn't go home that night. And maybe the fact that you actually spoke that to somebody was enough to keep you from following through. Please speak up. Please share your struggle. It's not easy. I know, and I know that what I'm asking from you feels impossible. And I know that it's a lot. But I know, I really believe that there is a whole different life and experience waiting for you on the other side. I'm glad that you're here. No matter who you are, no matter when you're watching this, I'm glad that you're here. And the fact that you're watching me speak about this, you matter to me. Thank you so much for listening, for being here, for being alive, for not giving up.